Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Okay, let's start with a question, a really fundamental one that I think we all sort of have a built-in answer for. When does human sexual desire actually peak? I mean, if you ask pretty much anyone on the street, the answer you'll get, the gut reaction, is probably, the early 20s?
The early 20s, yeah. It's a time we associate with, peak physical fitness, peak biological fertility. It just seems to make sense.
It feels logical, right? The engine should be running hottest when the body is biologically primed to reproduce.
Exactly, that's the assumption.
But a massive new scientific study, a real deep dive, has just completely upended that idea. It's delivered this counter-narrative that is so surprising, it might just change how we understand desire across our entire adult lives.
It really does shift the perspective.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are going to get into the hard, quantitative data. This was published in the journal Scientific Reports.
Right, and this isn't some small niche survey.
No, not at all. This is a really rigorous analysis of the Estonian Biobank, and it's looking at how the most sort of basic external facts of your life, your age, your gender, if you have kids, your job, how those things predict one of the most fundamental parts of our well-being, sexual desire.
And I think the scale here is really what we need to focus on first, because it's what sets this research apart from so much of what's come before.
How big are we talking?
The researchers analyzed data from 67,334 adults.
Wow. 67,000.
67,000. And the age range is huge, from 18 all the way up to 89 years old.
Okay, so it covers the whole adult lifespan.
The whole thing. And because this data comes from the Estonian Biobank, it's not just a random sample. It represents about 7% of the country's entire adult population.
So this is an unusually large and really representative sample group.
It's incredibly robust. It lets the team draw these statistically powerful conclusions that you just can't get from smaller, more specialized studies.
And their approach, from what I gather, was actually quite elegant in its simplicity. They weren't digging into deep psychological motives or anything like that.
No, not at all. They asked a very simple, very fundamental question.
Which was?
How much of the difference we see in desire levels from person to person can be explained just by looking at these easily accessible, basic demographic facts?
Okay, just the surface level stuff.
Just the surface level stuff. And this is where we get our first really foundational insight, these basic factors alone. So without even considering personality or health or cultural attitudes,
right,
they explained 28.3% of the total variance in sexual desire.
28.3%. Now that number, it might sound a little small at first glance.
It might. But in the context of human behavior, explaining nearly a third of the difference between people using only external life facts, that's incredible. It's really substantial.
So let me just process that. It means almost 1/3 of the difference between, say, your level of desire and your neighbor's can be predicted just by knowing their age, their gender, and their family setup.
That's it. It gives us this clear, undeniable sort of structural map of human sexual motivation.
So that 28% figure immediately tells me that two things are going to be the absolute stars of this show. Gender and age. They have to be the biggest predictors.
They are the mountains in this landscape, absolutely. When the researchers ran their multivariate models, and that just means they're controlling for everything at the same time, gender and age emerged as these colossal key predictors.
Let's start with gender then.
Okay. So when they first just looked at the raw numbers, what we call the univariate analysis, men consistently reported substantially higher desire than women.
No surprise there. That lines up with decades of other research.
Exactly. It's a very robust finding. But what's critical for you to understand is how the researchers then sort of purified this data.
Purified.
Yeah.
So let's break that down, because that sounds like some statistical jargon we need to translate.
It is, but it's important. When we just look at that raw difference, we're seeing a correlation, but it could be misleading.
How so?
Well, let's use an analogy. Imagine you're studying height and you notice, hey, basketball players are taller than everyone else. That's your raw finding.
Right.
But you also know that basketball players tend to be younger. They tend to be healthier. A multivariate model is what lets you control for age and health. It asks, once you've accounted for those things, what is the unique contribution of just being a basketball player to height?
Ah, I see. It isolates the one variable you're interested in.
Precisely. And in this study, the standardized coefficient for gender in the main model was 0.74.
Okay, so what does that 0.74 number actually tell us?
It tells us that being male remained, by a huge margin, the single highest predictive factor for having higher desire. You could think of it like this. If you plotted the effects of all the other variables, education, job, relationship status, they look like little bungalows on a chart.
And gender.
Gender, with that 0.74 coefficient, is the skyscraper. It's the dominant, unshakable factor, even after you've statistically adjusted for every other confounding variable they measured.
But it's also important to touch on the nuance you mentioned earlier. You said the overall effect of gender actually went down a little bit when they moved from the raw data to this cleaner, multivariate analysis. Why would that be?
That's a great question. It's because some of that initial raw difference we saw was actually being confounded by other factors.
So other things were muddying the waters.
Exactly. For instance, if the men in the sample happen to be, on average, at a life stage that independently boosts desire, say, their late 30s, which we'll get to, then that life stage was artificially inflating the raw gender difference.
I see.
So once the researchers adjust for that, once they compare a 40-year-old man to a 40-year-old woman, both with similar jobs and families, the pure effect of gender is still enormous, but it's just a little smaller than it first appeared. The adjustment just gives us a cleaner, more accurate measurement.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's move on to the age curve, because this is where that popular idea that desire peaks in the 20s gets absolutely demolished, especially for men.
This is truly the finding that challenges the standard narrative. When we zoom in on the age curve in the data, it shows that men's sexual desire does not peak in their teens or their 20s.
So when does it peak?
It appears to peak quite significantly around their late 30s to early 40s, and after that, it begins a long, gradual decline. This is a profound discovery. It runs directly counter to any kind of simple biological explanation.
Right, because if testosterone levels start their slow decline after the early 30s, why on earth would desire not just stay high, but actually increase between, say, 35 and 45?
That's the million-dollar question. This midlife peak forces us to look beyond just hormones, beyond endocrinology, and really examine the psychosocial context of midlife for men. The fact that the peak is delayed like this suggests that other factors are significantly at play.
So what does the analysis suggest is happening for men in that age bracket? What's going on that's powerful enough to outweigh the biological reality of declining testosterone?
It points very strongly toward relational stability. That, combined with, say, professional establishment and a growth in self-confidence.
The life circumstances.
Exactly. Men in their late 30s and 40s are, on average, in more stable, long-term relationships compared to younger men. Younger men might still be navigating the very unpredictable world of dating or being in these early, more volatile partnerships.
So stability becomes a kind of psychological aphrodisiac.
In many ways, yes. The research has shown for a long time that stable relationships are associated with more sexual activity, better communication, deeper emotional intimacy.
But what about the idea that long-term relationships lead to boredom, to habituation, the novelty wearing off?
And that's a real factor, certainly. But it seems for men that the benefits of stability, the emotional connection, the sense of having made it in life, the reduction in the stress of constantly seeking a partner, may be acting as this powerful, protective, even enhancing mechanism. It seems to sustain or even increase desire well past the biological maximum.
So peak desire, for men at least, is less about peak hormones and more about peak life stability and confidence.
That's what the data strongly suggests.
Okay, so let's contrast that completely unexpected male trajectory with the female experience. Because for women, the data looks very different.
That's correct. It's much less kind to the idea of a stable midlife plateau. For women, desire starts lower than men's. It remains consistently lower across the entire lifespan, and it experiences a much steeper and more consistent decline.
And when does that decline really start to pick up speed?
It becomes particularly pronounced after the age of 50.
So that substantial gender gap we established earlier, it doesn't just stay the same over time.
No, it widens. It actually widens over time. This is one of the most significant and, frankly, stark findings in the study.
How much does it widen?
If you look at the standardized gender difference coefficients across the different age groups, you can see it clearly. In the 18 to 29 age group, the gender difference in desire is already substantial. But that gap just steadily increases, and it peaks dramatically in the 60-plus age group.
So the impact of aging is it's delayed or somehow buffered for men, but for women, it hits earlier and harder.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's more pronounced, and it kicks in earlier and more steeply.
Okay, so why? Why does that gap become such a cavern in later life? The immediate thought is menopause, but Is that the whole story?
Hormonal shifts, especially menopause, are undeniably a major contributor. They trigger physical changes, vasomotor symptoms, and they often require relational adjustments that absolutely impact desire. But it's not the entire story.
So what else is going on?
We can't ignore the immense load that women often carry in that sandwich generation life stage, which lines up almost perfectly with that post-50 decline.
You mean being caught between aging parents and growing children?
Exactly. It's a period often marked by a huge increase in stress. You're managing aging parents, launching adult children, and dealing with all the accumulated relational and physical health burdens of life.
So if the male peak is sustained by stability and confidence, the female decline is often accelerated by this, compounded stress, and a massive drain on their resources.
Precisely. The data shows that the variability in women's average desire scores across the lifespan is higher than in men's. And that points to a greater influence from these external pressures, from reproductive cycles, and from the unique sociocultural expectations we place on women about their bodies, their relationships, and their roles as caregivers.
It sounds like for many women, midlife is when the demands on their time and their emotional energy just hit an absolute maximum.
And when that happens, there's very little psychic space, very little energy left over for erotic thought or sexual motivation.
All right, moving beyond age, the next really massive predictor here, and this is one of the most complex sociological insights the study offers, is the interactive effect of having children. This is where we see the parenting paradox in hard data.
This was the strongest interactive effect the researchers found. It shows how parenthood impacts desire in a starkly different way depending on your gender.
Okay, what did the data show?
It showed a very clear split. For women, having more children was linked to lower sexual desire.
Okay, that seems intuitive.
But conversely, for men, a greater number of children was robustly linked to higher desire.
Wow, okay, that correlation feels incredibly unfair. For women, kids mean lower desire, but for men, it's the opposite. Why?
It likely comes down to the differential distribution of labor and stress in many households. The interaction effects between gender and the number of children were strong, and they actually increased with family size.
How did they measure that?
Well, they quantified it. For men compared to women, having just one child resulted in a measured increase in their desire score, even when controlling for other predictors.
And that effect gets bigger with more kids.
It strengthens significantly. It reaches its largest magnitude in families with 5 children. This indicates an increasingly stronger positive gender difference in desire with each additional child.
Let's break down the mechanisms for women first. Why the decline? What's the thinking there?
For women, it's almost universally tied to the tangible and psychic drain of increased caregiving demands. We're talking about chronic stress, physical exhaustion, severe time constraints.
And the physiological changes from pregnancy and postpartum recovery.
Absolutely. All those factors fundamentally reduce the opportunities for, erotic autonomy, for spontaneity, for just having the energy left at the end of the day to initiate or even engage in sexual activity.
Desire requires energy and focus.
It really does. And for mothers with multiple children, those resources are often chronically depleted.
But now let's turn to men. Why the positive association with a bigger family? You mentioned 2 main possibilities earlier.
Right. The first one is about psychosocial reinforcement. For many men, having a larger family strengthens their sense of being a provider, of being a central, competent figure in the family.
So it's a confidence booster.
In a way, yes. In this life stage, having a large family can signal success, stability, competence. And that can act as a psychological booster, an almost unconscious aphrodisiac that reinforces their desire.
And the second possibility?
The second, and this is important because of the study's design, relates to that limitation. Because this is a cross-sectional study, it's just a snapshot in time. We can't rule out reverse causality.
Meaning?
Meaning it may simply be that men who naturally have higher baseline levels of sexual desire are just statistically more likely to go on and have larger families in the first place.
So it's not that having kids raises their desire, but that having higher desire leads to more kids.
It could be. We can't say for sure from this data. But either way, the finding highlights these profound differences in time availability, stress burden, and social roles between partners.
What about the immediate aftermath of a birth? Did they look at people who had a child within the last year?
They did. And initially in the raw data, that group actually had a significantly higher average desire score.
which seems strange.
It does, but that initial boost gets moderated very quickly. Once the researchers controlled for age and other factors in the full model, a small negative association emerged for recent childbirth.
So desire actually goes down right after a birth.
Yes, and that negative effect is particularly salient for women. Postpartum changes, the physical demands of breastfeeding, severely disrupted sleep, all of that immediately and negatively impacts sexual well-being for both partners, really.
Okay, let's pivot now from children to relationship status itself, because this is another area with a counterintuitive finding. We tend to assume being in a stable relationship is the ideal state for desire.
Right. But when they controlled for all the other predictors, partnered individuals actually reported lower desire compared to single individuals.
A measurable negative effect.
Yes.
Just from being in a relationship.
Yes. The beta coefficient was mitoco 0.0. Now, that finding seems to contradict what we were just saying about stability helping the male peak.
It does. How do you square that?
It just speaks to the complexity of long-term intimacy. While relationship satisfaction and emotional connection are critical, and we'll get to that, the model suggests that, on a global level, the challenges of a long-term partnership.
Like what? Routine, boredom?
Routine, habituation, navigating conflict, maybe just sheer proximity fatigue. All of that might exert a net negative effect on desire compared to the baseline reported by single individuals.
So is that the price of stability? You trade that high, often unfulfilled desire you have when you're single for the safety and predictability of a partnership.
That's a really powerful way to frame it. And what's more, the data showed that the gender gap in sexual desire was actually larger among partnered people than it was among single people.
So being in a relationship magnifies the gender gap.
It does. And that emphasizes that the dynamics within the relationship, especially potential discrepancies in desire levels or the unequal allocation of relational labor, are significant factors here. And they tend to disproportionately affect women.
But we can't just write off relationships completely, because you mentioned satisfaction was still a powerful positive predictor.
Absolutely. The quality of the partnership matters immensely. The model showed that satisfaction with the relationship was a clear positive predictor of desire.
And was that true for both men and women?
It was, but what's even more insightful, especially for anyone in a clinical setting, is that the link between satisfaction and desire was found to be more positive for women than for men.
What does that mean exactly?
It indicates that emotional connection, the quality of the relationship, the state of the partnership, those things are stronger, more essential determinants of sexual desire for women. For many women, the emotional state of the relationship isn't just a factor in their desire, it's more like a prerequisite for a desire to even exist.
Let's shift our focus now to some of the demographic groups that often get overlooked in these kinds of studies, sexual orientation and socioeconomic factors.
Right. And this is where a sample size of this magnitude is so important. The vast majority of the sample, about 95%, identified as heterosexual.
So to get any reliable conclusions about the other groups, you need a massive overall sample.
Exactly. And the large sample really paid off here, providing some real clarity on desire levels across different orientations. We see a clear hierarchy emerge.
What did that look like?
Bisexual individuals reported the highest levels of desire in the raw data, and that finding stayed highly significant in the full multivariate models. Pansexual individuals also reported higher desire.
Why would that be? Why would those groups consistently report higher desire, even when you control for age and relationship status?
Well, this is often linked to the psychological and behavioral aspects of these orientations. It could indicate a broader spectrum of attraction or perhaps a greater psychological openness towards sexual exploration.
So if your potential pool of attraction is just wider,
then the frequency or the intensity of desire-triggering stimuli might simply be higher.
and what about the other end of that spectrum?
At the other end, asexual individuals consistently recorded the lowest desire. They had a massive negative standardized coefficient of minus 1.03.
Minus 1.03. To put that in perspective, how big is that?
It's immense. The negative effect of identifying as asexual is actually stronger than the positive effect of being male that we talked about earlier.
That's a statistically powerful finding.
It is, and it really reinforces the modern understanding of asexuality. It's not a disorder of low desire or a physical problem. It's a distinct, fundamental sexual orientation that's defined by the low or absent experience of sexual attraction.
It's a fundamental difference in motivation.
Exactly, and it transcends the basic demographics.
Interestingly, the study also found that these orientation-based differences in desire, they largely transcended the gender divide.
That's correct. Men generally reported higher desire than women across all the orientations, which just reinforces that initial gender gap we saw. But the orientation effect itself, say the difference between a heterosexual and a bisexual person, that largely held up regardless of whether the person was male or female.
Were there any exceptions?
There was one notable exception. Asexual males reported lower desire than the reference group in one of the models, which might suggest that when a man deviates so significantly from that social expectation of high desire, the effect might be slightly magnified.
Okay, let's move on to socioeconomic factors, occupation and education. These are often used as proxies for stress, time, social status. After you control for those big things, gender, age, parenthood, what unique role did they play?
Their predictive power was certainly much smaller. They're almost tertiary compared to gender and age. But there were some notable effects, especially with occupation.
Let's start with education.
Okay, with education, once we controlled for age and job, it showed minimal unique predictive power. While people with an undergraduate degree had the highest raw desire scores, the unique contribution of having a degree, any degree, was pretty small overall.
Why do you think education had such a small effect on its own?
It suggests that any initial differences you see are probably confounded by other factors. It's likely age, younger people tend to be more educated, or the type of job that a degree leads to. Once you strip away the age and the job effect, the degree itself doesn't seem to predict desire in a unique way.
Okay, so let's focus on occupation, which you said showed more variability. In the raw data, who had the highest desire?
Initially, it pointed to groups like professional military personnel and senior managers.
But this is where the multivariate model really proves its value.
Exactly. The expert analysis stressed that those raw findings were highly confounded by age. Military personnel are typically younger than 40, which would naturally inflate their average desire score. Once you remove that confounding variable, you can see the unique, pure influence of the job category itself.
So once you take out the noise from age and income, which jobs uniquely predicted lower desire?
This is where we see that certain jobs, likely ones characterized by chronic stress or low autonomy, exert a unique negative influence. Specifically, those who had never worked had a statistically significant negative association. But the largest unique negative finding was for elementary workers. They reported substantially lower desire.
What kind of jobs does that category include?
It often includes roles with high physical demand, low control over one's schedule, or monotonous tasks. It's the classic profile for chronic job-related burnout.
So is the data telling us that jobs with high demand but very low control, which is the definition of chronic workplace stress, are unique passion killers, independent of someone's age or education?
That is the compelling interpretation, yes. Other roles like mid-level specialists, office workers, and sales workers also reported significantly lower desire compared to senior managers.
It really suggests that the demands of certain roles, whether it's through stress, time constraints, or just a lack of psychological agency at work, can uniquely dampen sexual motivation.
It does, and that's a vital piece of context for anyone experiencing low desire who might be blaming themselves or their partner when in fact their job could be a major contributing factor.
This study, it provides this incredibly robust foundation. It uses easily measurable external life facts and explaining 28.3% of human desire with just that. It's a huge accomplishment.
It really is.
But as soon as we look at that figure, it immediately reminds us that 3/4, fully 72% of the story, is still completely untold by this data. So before we talk about the implications, we have to talk about the study's limitations.
Addressing the limitations is crucial for context, especially with research on this scale. The most significant one, I think, concerns how they measured sexual desire itself.
How did they do it?
Because this was part of a huge biobank survey, the measurement had to be brief. So desire was measured using only two simple general items. I have strong sexual urges, and I do not think much about sex.
Okay, so it's a good measure of general sexual motivation, like a baseline drive, but it's missing the nuance.
Precisely. This simple, one-dimensional measurement captured a general component of desire, but it couldn't differentiate between, say, solitary desire, the desire for masturbation, versus dyadic desire, which is partner-focused.
And it also misses partner-specific attraction versus a general libido.
Exactly. For many people, desire is highly context-dependent. It can be strong for one partner but not another. A two-item scale just can't capture that kind of specificity.
And the second major limitation is that giant unexplained piece of the pie, the 72% we just mentioned.
Right. While 28.3% explained by demographics is substantial, it means 72% of the difference between people's desire is driven by things that weren't included in this study.
Like what?
Well, the researchers themselves point out that previous studies suggest psychological and relational factors. Things like personality traits, emotional intimacy, health concerns, cultural attitudes about sex. Those things can explain up to 40% of the variance that this study missed.
So we have the foundational map, but we're missing the internal psychological architecture.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
And finally, there's the ever-present issue of causality, which seems really vital when we're trying to interpret something like the parenting paradox or the male peak.
Yes, the cross-sectional nature of the data, that snapshot in time, means it cannot definitively prove cause and effect. We're seeing strong correlations, but we can't establish the direction of the arrow.
So for the male peak in the late 30s,
We don't know, does having a stable, successful relationship cause the higher desire? Or are men who happen to have higher intrinsic desire just more successful at building and maintaining those relationships?
and the same logic applies to the parenting paradox.
Exactly. We know more children correlate with higher male desire. But is that because having a bigger family elevates desire? Or is it because men with higher inherent desire levels are simply more prolific? We absolutely need future longitudinal research, studies that follow people over time to unravel these causal pathways.
Okay, let's focus on the so what now. What are the practical implications of having this robust, large-scale data for you, the listener, and for practitioners working in sexual health or counseling?
I think the researchers hope this data fundamentally shifts the psychological landscape for individuals who are experiencing changes in desire.
How so?
Well, if your desire changes, if it declines after you have a second child, or if it stabilizes into your late 30s, you can now understand that these shifts are often a natural, predictable, and measurable response to your life stage. It's not necessarily a personal failure or a sign your relationship is broken or some irreparable loss of self.
It's about normalizing the variations based on the context of your life.
It absolutely is. And that offers immense value for clinical use. A relationship counselor or a therapist can use this large-scale data to normalize changes in desire over the life course.
And especially highlight those gender differences.
Crucially, for instance, if a couple comes in and the wife is struggling with low desire after having 3 children, the therapist can use this data to pivot the focus.
Away from her as the problem.
Precisely. Instead of focusing on her as some kind of individual pathology, they can normalize the finding that low desire in women with multiple children is a statistical norm. It's linked to resource drain and systemic stress, and that shifts the entire therapeutic focus towards systemic solutions, redistributing labor, increasing support, reducing the stress burden.
And that feels like a monumental shift in how we could approach a really common relational challenge. What about the surprise of the male peak? How should that change the conversation?
For men, it provides this powerful counter-narrative to the panic that often comes with passing your supposed biological peak. It suggests the desire engine is maintained not just by chemicals, but by confidence and connection.
So if a man in his late 20s is worried about his desire,
A practitioner can reassure him that the most stable, highest period of his desire may still be ahead of him, that it's linked to achieving relational stability, not just relying on the testosterone he had when he was 19. It reframes desire as a function of maturity and context, not just raw, youthful biology.
So to just quickly summarize the biggest takeaways from our deep dive today, we've challenged that core assumption that sexual desire peaks in the early 20s. We now have this robust data showing the sheer magnitude of the gender gap, a gap that persists and actually widens as we age. We discovered the counterintuitive midlife male desire peak around the late 30s to early 40s, suggesting desire is sustained more by relational stability and life establishment than just by hormones. And finally, we saw that profound and statistically significant parenting paradox, where having children has a measurably opposite effect on desire for men and for women.
We've spent this time unpacking that 28% of desire that can be explained by these external demographic factors. And this provides a crucial, non-judgmental structural map of human sexuality. But the most provocative thought, I think, for you to consider now is what lies within the remaining 72%.
The unexplained part.
The vast unexplained part. That majority of the variance is shaped by these profoundly internal and relational factors. We're talking about the complex interplay of your personality, your inherent levels of neuroticism or openness to experience, your history of physical and mental health, the depth of emotional connection and communication in your partnership, and the unspoken cultural expectations that you carry with you.
So we have the foundation now.
We have the demographic foundation established. The future of research in this area must now focus on successfully integrating these more subtle psychological and relational variables with the robust demographic map we've just explored. How does your unique personality interact with your specific job stress and your age to determine your unique desire level? That is the next frontier of exploration.
Thank you for sharing your sources and for joining us as we went deep into the science of sexual desire and age. We look forward to diving deep with you again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.